Hi, I'm Michelle. I'm a believer in Celebrate Recovery who struggles with sexual abuse and codependency. When I was around 2 years old, my parents divorced. My mom and dad both remarried. I was a part of both weddings. My mom married a man with 2 sons from a previous marriage, and my dad married a woman with a daughter from a previous marriage. For the next couple years of my life, I remember living two different lifestyles. At my dad's house, things were very structured. We had a routine for everything. I remember the routine made me feel safe and I knew what to expect. At my mom's house, things were different. There was some structure, but my mom soon had 2 more children. Things quickly became crazy with 6 children and 2 adults. I became comfortable and enjoyed living with my mom and visiting my dad. I remember looking forward to my dad's Sunday night phone calls. Around age 10, my stepdad asked me to go for a walk with him. He told me that he and my mom were getting a divorce. He told me that he would always love me. I remember being in shock when we moved into our new home. I knew that when my mom and dad divorced, that my dad had to keep a relationship with me because he was my father. But I wondered what my stepdad's connection to me would be. I slowly began to realize that he and his sons, who I developed close relationships with, weren't going to be part of my life anymore. My mom took my brother, my sisters, and me to live with my uncle, his wife, her 2 daughters, and my other uncle. So there we were, 6 children, 4 adults, living in one house. Things were quickly changing for me. On top of a divorce, losing my brothers, and moving, my dad's Sunday night phone calls began to fade into monthly calls. While living with my uncle, I shared a room with my cousin. She and I were the same age, so we also went to school together. My uncle would pick us up and take us to school. I remember starting to think that he was cool because he would let us hang out the car window while he was driving. My cousin and I started to hang out with him after school. One day, he gave us wine to drink and then began to sexually abuse the both of us. I can only remember a few instances of the abuse. However, I do remember the shame that I did not enjoy it. I didn't tell anyone while it was happening. I don't know why, but I felt it needed to stay a secret. During this time, I started to act out sexually as a way of coping with what I was going through. This only made me feel more ashamed and more convinced that I was doing something wrong. A few months passed, and I found my mom found a place for us to move again. The only catch was that my uncle needed to move with us to watch us while my mom worked. I hoped that because my cousin wasn't there, the abuse would end. But one night, I woke up with my uncle standing over me. I began to find ways to protect myself. One night, I asked my older sister if I could sleep in her room. She was a light sleeper, and I knew that if he came into her room, she would wake up. So while he lived with us, I slept on the floor of my sister's room. Little did I know that he would move on to abusing my little sister. Around a year later, my mom began to introduce us to different men she was dating. My calls from my dad turned into holiday and birthday phone calls and visits. One night, my mom came home with a man she had been dating and told us that she was going to marry him. After they got married, my uncle moved out and my new stepdad moved in. Things quickly became difficult with my mom's new marriage. At times, my mom would come to me with marriage and financial problems. I wanted to protect my mom and started to feel responsible for solving those problems. About this time, I began high school. I was introduced to a girl who was a year older than I was. She was beautiful and confident, and I was drawn to her because I didn't feel beautiful, and I certainly didn't have any confidence. She claimed to be a believer in God. I thought because she claimed to love God that she'd be following him as well. The first night I spent at her house, we woke up, and around 10 a.m. she offered me a drink. Desiring to be accepted, I began to drink with her. We continued to drink throughout the day. Later that day, we went to the mall, and I found myself stealing from a number of different stores. That night, when we got home, we went to a park to meet some guys. I was uncomfortable with everything I was doing, but instead of saying how I felt, I went along with everything she wanted to do. One day, she came to me at school and asked me if I wanted to try a type of drug the next time we hung out. Thinking that I would lose a friend if I said no, I told her I would try drugs with her. Thankfully, that night never happened. Because of my fear of being alone, I was willing to try drugs. At the time this was happening, another girl in my English class asked if I wanted to hang out. Because it wasn't in me to say no to anything, we made plans to hang out. We hung out, and when we did, she brought up God and asked if I believed. Now, remember when I said while I was visiting my dad, things were structured and routine. One of those routines was going to church and praying every night. I told her that I believed in God and that I had gone to Bible studies and that I had accepted Jesus as God's son. I slowly began to live two different lifestyles again. While I was with one friend, we would drink, steal, and hang out with boys. While I was with the other, we would have long talks about God and attend church. After a while, I knew I couldn't live both lives. I felt that I was losing my identity. So one night, I prayed and made the choice to give God control over my life. I ended the relationship with my older friend and began a stronger relationship with my new friend. This is also the time when I started my first job. Out of fear of not having the security of money, I never spent the money I made. Instead, I saved every paycheck in case my mom needed it. Since the time of the abuse, I had been comparing myself to my older sister. It started off with me thinking that she was better than me. One time, I locked myself in a bathroom with a journal. I sat there crying as I made a detailed list. I wrote her name next to mine, then drew a line down the middle. Under her name, I wrote all the positive things she had. For example, her grades and her relationship with my mom. Under my name, I wrote all the negative things about myself. As I made the list, I started to hate who I was. Later in my life, I started making lists again. I started to compare myself to my best friend. I thought she was beautiful, confident, and successful. 3 things I didn't think I was. One day during school, I found myself in a conversation with my friend. I began to share with her my past abuse. I began to cry as I opened up to her. She comforted me by telling me what happened to me wasn't my fault and that my uncle was wrong. She asked me if I had told anyone else about the abuse. She told me that I needed to tell my mom what had happened. I did not want to do that. She then made a deal with me. If I told my mom about the abuse, she would tell her dad about an event that happened in her life. That day, when my mom picked me up from school, I got in the car, scared out of my mind. I knew that I had to tell her, but I couldn't find the words. I had no idea how to tell my mom that her brother had abused me. To be honest, I don't remember how or what I said to start the conversation, but I told her. She told me that my little sister had come to her and said she was also abused and that we would all talk later that night. That night, my mom, my younger sister, my older sister, and I all sat down on the floor of my mom's room. My little sister told us what had happened, but all I could do was cry and say nothing. Then my mom gave us a choice of keeping the past quiet or telling someone who would take us away from her. Out of fear, I decided to keep the past a secret. As the years passed, my mom's marriage was slowly falling apart. My older sister got married and moved out, and I remember sitting myself down and thinking that because she moved out, I needed to fulfill her responsibilities. I saw my mom's marriage falling apart, so I thought I needed to save it. I decided to start a family Bible study. I had the whole family come together and read scripture and pray. I thought that my efforts would be enough to save everyone. Then one day, after school, I came home to my mom in tears. She explained to me that my stepdad decided that he didn't want a family anymore, then told me that we would be moving into a smaller house and that I would share a room with her. She also asked if I could lend her some money and that she would need help around the house. I saw a huge opportunity to be the hero in my family, so I said I would do everything she asked. We moved into the new house, and I took on my new role in the family. But while moving, my stepdad decided that he did want a family. At 18, I was confused as to what my role in my family was. I started to find any reason not to be at home. I would go to work, go to school. I joined the dance team, Bible studies, and drama. I would only go home to sleep or to eat. I also had no respect for my body. I would eat whatever I wanted whenever I wanted. On the weekends, I would sleep all day and work at night. Because I had no boundaries with my family, I began to overcompensate in other areas in effort to protect myself. I quickly isolated myself and became disconnected. At work, I made a few friends, but for the most part, I wouldn't talk to anyone. I didn't know who I was, and I didn't like who I was. And because of that, I felt that nobody else liked who I was either. The best line of defense to avoid pain was to get to a point where I didn't feel anything at all. I stopped feeling any highs or lows. I wasn't unhappy, but I never experienced joy either. It had been 2 years since I had made my commitment to completely follow Christ, and my life wasn't reflecting that. I wasn't connecting the events of my past to the choices I was making now because I had denied it for so long. I would go to church and hear about the fruits of following Christ, but never experience them for myself. I never really had a two-way relationship with anyone, especially God. I would tell myself that I loved God and my love for Him was all I needed. I didn't expect anything in return, not love, protection, wisdom, grace, or healing. I would read the Bible inconsistently. I didn't seek out intimacy with God because I didn't think He wanted it with me. I didn't think God cared who I was. I actually feared going to heaven, being face to face with God, and having Him flat out reject me. I was hoping that my love for Him would be enough to save me. I never expected Him to follow through on His promises back to me. I reached out to my Christian friend. She said that she wanted to change things in her life as well. So we got together every Sunday and fasted and prayed together. The third Sunday we met, she was praying for me. She prayed that I would receive healing from the past abuse, and that's when I broke down and started to cry. We talked after that night, and she mentioned there were support groups for people who had been abused. I went to church one night. I walked out and saw the Celebrate Recovery table. Not knowing anything about it, I asked if they had a group for children of divorce. I didn't even ask about the abuse. I still hadn't come out of denial. They said they did, and it was called the Codependency Group. I didn't think I was codependent, but I went to their Friday night service. After the service, I did not go to Newcomers 101. I went straight to a group. I still didn't know which group to go to, though, so I found someone I knew who had been through recovery and told her about my past. She recommended a group for sexual abuse. Shortly after attending a few Fridays, I was introduced to Carrie. We shared our stories with each other, and she told me she was leading a woman's 12-step group. I knew that I needed to step out and seek the healing Jesus talked about in the Bible, so I joined. My whole life, I had carried the pain, burden, and shame from my past. When I began the group, I thought I needed to hide my pain, save my family, and deny the shame I had. I thought I had the power to make my life manageable. I wasn't prepared to experience the freedom and relief I would gain by admitting that I was powerless over my compulsive behaviors and that my life had become unmanageable. I remember trying to answer the first question honestly, but was stuck. What areas in your life do you have power or control over? Be specific. When my leader said to cross out what we had written and write nothing, I didn't believe her. It wasn't until I read the acrostic Powerless in Lesson 2 that it started to make sense. The acrostic is pride, only ifs, worrying, escape, resentments, loneliness, emptiness, selfishness, and separation. I began to see that I was using all of these things to try to protect myself instead of relying on God. But the week before I finished my 12-step group, I began to feel that the whole year had been a waste of my time. I was frustrated and felt the program just hadn't worked for me. I sat down and prayed. I wrote out 3 things I wanted as a result of the group. The first was I wanted to serve as a leader in a group. The second was that I wanted to continue the principles, mainly step 9. The last was to stay connected to at least one person in the group. I wrote that journal November 5th, 2003. I continued to have questions and doubts, but kept going to Celebrate Recovery and working the steps. I began to really understand that I was powerless and that I had to give my life up to God. I became ready for God to remove my defects of character and allowed this process for the next year of my life. Humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up. James 4:10. Since writing that journal entry in 2003, I have led the junior high Life Hurts, God Heals twice. I have made amends with significant people in my life, my dad, my sister, and my best friend. I look forward to the day God will present the opportunity to make direct amends with my mom. I have a weekly accountability group with 2 women who completed the 12-step group with me. It took over a year for me to see that God was faithful in all of his promises. When I finished my 12-step recovery group, the leader suggested that I look into being a leader myself. As I prayed about becoming a leader, I developed a passion for reaching out to youth. By age 13, I experienced 2 divorces in my family. I had been sexually abused and felt the effects of moving over 8 times. While going through these major experiences, I felt alone, with no one to reach out to. As a leader, I wanted to create a place where teenagers could go and experience God's healing and grace. It took a year for an opportunity in youth ministry to open up at Celebrate Recovery. I take so much joy in sharing my past and the way God has healed me. I have been able to reach out to teenage girls who are going through a lot of similar things I went through. Recently, I was asked to be a leader of a new group at Celebrate Recovery, a women's college-age 12-step group. I am thankful that God is using my past to bring his love into other people's lives. Sobriety is an ongoing day-to-day battle. For me, sobriety started when I finished my 12-step group and committed to continue my recovery. And through my sobriety, I am discovering my talents, building my self-esteem, and repairing any damage done. Luke 12:2-3 says, "It was then that I realized that whatever is covered up will be uncovered, and every secret will be made known. So then whatever you have said in dark will be heard in broad daylight." Through the long process of the 12 steps, and with Jesus as the foundation of my recovery, I'm continuing my sobriety. Jesus showed me in his word how much he loves me and how he has given me talents and gifts. I've discovered that one of my gifts is working with children. I have been promoted at my school as a mentor to other teachers. Through my college classes, I've discovered there are many things I'm interested in pursuing. Before my sobriety, I simply settled for whatever circumstances dealt me. I did not strive for more. Now I feel confident and ready to find success. One promise in the Bible God is fulfilling for me is, "For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." I am also working on communicating my feelings. I'm learning how to give love more fully, and for the first time, I'm receiving love as well. I'm learning to have a relationship with God. He's showing me the woman he created me to be. Through the program, I have begun the process of healing my past hurts and restoring my relationships. I'm discovering my identity in Christ as a whole person. Thank you for letting me share.